was bound up in ropes. So he was symbolizing in this way that he is what was called in Israel the scapegoat, which was basically something that the old Jewish tradition would do on the Day of Atonement. They would take one goat and sacrifice it for the sins of Israel, and then another one, they would basically place all the sins of Israel onto that goat and then release the goat into the wilderness. So, in our little Divine Madness series, we want to touch today the biblical prophets. And there's actually many of them who did crazy things, but we will speak about Ezekiel, who was one of the main 3 big prophets of the Old Testament. And those prophets, they have been sometimes misunderstood as being some sort of, sitting with a crystal ball and seeing the future and so on. And as much as some of the prophets did have prophetic visions of the future, actually their role in the Old Testament is quite different, which is to be the voice of God, basically. So these prophets, they would typically have at one point in their lives some sort of vision, and in this way connect with God at a very profound level, being lifted into the heavens, or having a vision of the throne of God, like Ezekiel had, for example. And from that moment of being chosen as a prophet of God, they would become the voice of God. And in order to express whatever the God of Israel wanted to tell to his people, they would use all sorts of funny means. Also, they would sometimes just speak, and some of these prophets, they would actually be at least close to the royal court and give their opinion in a quite straightforward way. But others would be much more crazy, and definitely Ezekiel is one of those. And if you want to read a bit of a crazy life of a prophet and also some crazy visions, then the book of Ezekiel is definitely for you. The book was written in the time of the exile of the Israelites from Israel, when they were taken out to Babylon. But Ezekiel was basically one of the last big prophets that made it very clear, guys, you've been misbehaving so horribly, God is not happy with you, and you either basically know there's nothing you can do about it anymore, you messed up so bad, you got to go to exile, and that's just what it is. That was basically the message that we had come to. Up to that point, if you read the books of the prophets in the Bible, you basically have this build-up of a similar message. It's always like, guys, you have to stop praying to false idols and think that this little pot of clay over here will bring you a good harvest. You should focus inside. You should focus on the I am, which is basically how the God of Israel calls himself. You should pray and have faith and be good people to each other. You shouldn't enslave each other. You shouldn't be treating each other with violence or with unfairness. Please, guys, pull yourself together and be my people. Be the people of virtue that I would like you to be. And then over and over and over, Israel would sin against that and just simply not follow these commands and have a lot of idol worship and a lot of violence towards one another, towards the poor, like oppression towards the poor, this sort of enforcing people to go into slavery and all sorts of stuff that the God of Israel was understandably not so happy about. And as it had built up to this crucial moment, it was like, okay, God had enough. It's like, you guys, you need a major purification, and I'm sending you off to exile, and Babylon will take over, and that's just what's going to happen. And he would bring this message through, like one of the voices who brought this message was the voice of the prophet Ezekiel. And basically, he had this massive vision of the throne of God just in front of him, with all the symbolism that we also traditionally know. And God basically told him, okay, you are my chosen one now, and you will speak on my behalf. And you will do all sorts of outrageous things, so people will listen. But let me tell you already now, they are not going to listen. That was basically the message to Ezekiel. And from there, brave as he was, he still did everything he was asked. And some of these things were quite crazy and bizarre. And knowing that it's not going to make a difference. A particularly crazy way that Ezekiel and also other prophets, but him in particular, was conveying his message with, as God asked him, is called sign acts. And these sign acts were basically enactments of the prophecy, of the message. So these prophets that would use sign acts, like Ezekiel was one of them, it was basically a little bit like street theater. He would just go out there in the marketplace or in whatever place God would ask him to go, into the temple yard or something, and then he would just make some massive, interesting drama there for everybody to see. Some of the less crazy things were that he would just go around with a covered face continuously, or he was digging at one point his way through a wall, or he would very often just sit and tremble and just shake, sit somewhere and shake. Or one thing that was socially really not accepted was that when his wife died, he completely skipped the funeral ceremony because God asked him to. So he would do these sort of weird things that would just stir up people to look and to see what's this dude all about. And then he would also do some more obvious things. All of these would have meaning, and you can go to the book of Ezekiel and read for all the different prophetic meaning that it has, but I want to zoom in to just a few of the things he did. So one thing that he did was pretty straightforward. God asked him to make a little model of Jerusalem and then to bring it to the streets and then to basically enact an attack upon Jerusalem for people to understand, okay, that's what's going to happen. So that's pretty straightforward. Another not so straightforward thing I actually want to read to you because it's quite interesting. Basically, he was asked by God to shave his hair and then to use the shaved hair in 3 different ways, and it goes like this in the Bible. So this is Ezekiel 5, starting from verse 1 and then onward. The Lord said, "Mortal man, take a sharp sword and use it to shave off your beard and all your hair. Then weigh the hair on scales and divide them into 3 parts. Burn up 1/3 of it in the city when the siege is over. Take another 1/3 and chop it up with your sword as you move around outside the city. Scatter the remaining 1/3 to the winds, and I will pursue it with my sword. Keep back a few hairs and wrap them in the hem of your clothes. Then take a few of them out again, throw them in the fire, and let them burn up. From the fire will spread the whole nation of Israel. Therefore, as I am the living God, this is the word of the sovereign Lord, because you defiled my temple with all the evil, disgusting things that you did, I will cut you down without mercy. 1/3 of your people will die from sickness and hunger in the city. 1/3 will be cut down by swords outside the city, and I will scatter the last 1/3 to the winds and pursue them with a sword." Pretty gnarly situation. Basically, God would give Ezekiel this very, very, very precise messages of what to do. Imagine, right? You're there in profound prayer, praying to do the will of God, and then God tells you, I tell you what to do. Shave off your beard and your hair, and then, divide it into 3 parts, and then chop one with the sword, and one in the fire, and one in the winds. It's like, okay, I can do that, but what is the point? Imagine that is your purpose, right? What faith you must have to actually follow through with this and do all these funny things. Another one that he did, and this may be the most famous one, is that he was lying on his left side for 390 days. And not only was he lying on his left side, which is a big tapas in itself, but he was bound up in ropes So he was symbolizing in this way that he is what was called in Israel the scapegoat, which was basically something that the old Jewish tradition would do on the Day of Atonement. They would take one goat and sacrifice it for the sins of Israel, and then another one they would basically place all the sins of Israel onto that goat and then release the goat into the wilderness. And the goat wouldn't have a very nice life. It would basically sit there and wait to be untied and then basically used for this purpose. And Ezekiel became this symbol somehow of the scapegoat by wrapping himself in ropes and then like being tied up and then lying on his left side for 390 days. And while he was lying like that, he was eating, but only very horrible food that was cooked on top of human poo. Imagine. Yeah, that was his tapas. Again, he got this very precise thing to do. So that was it. Okay, I lie here, I eat this poopy food, and tied up for over a year. Imagine. And I think he also then was lying on the other side from that, but I don't remember exactly how it went. The point being that Ezekiel was maybe one of the most eccentric prophets that somehow had this awkward task of reenacting, making visible the specific message that God had for his people. Exactly as it was prophesied, they would not listen, they kept going with what they were doing. Also, you can imagine, it's like, okay, this crazy man, he's doing all these things. I don't know how convincing that would be for the average person, but for Ezekiel himself, he proved himself to become one of the, let's say, most tight followers of the godly will in this way. So this is the story of the divine mad prophets from the Bible, in this case Ezekiel, and as I said, there are many more, and we'll probably do a few others at another point. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content on spirituality, Tantra and more.
And if you want to sign up for our online classes or for our retreats, you can see our website on the description below.